Hello everyone and welcome again to the Prado Museum for another of our weekly sessions in English with the American Friends of the Prado Museum. Today we'll be talking about Velázquez, and we're going to be looking at one of his most recognizable works called the Drunkards, or the Feast of Bacchus. This was painted around 1628, 1629, and this is one of Velázquez's first mythological subject, and he painted it right before his first trip to Italy. And this is the time where he first met Rubens, and Rubens would be a big influence for Velázquez. He encouraged Velázquez to go to Italy to see classical culture in person, and so it could even be that he suggested that Velázquez take on the challenge of painting a mythological subject like this one. So this is called the Feast of Bacchus. We can see the Roman god Bacchus here in the middle. We can identify him as a god immediately, right? He's different from the ordinary men because first he's naked, and he's classically beautiful, and he's covered in these robes that are just so elegantly draped over his lap. He's wearing a crown of grape leaves, so we immediately know that we're looking at the Roman god Bacchus. And then on the other side of the painting, we have all of these people that are all of the opposite, right? These are ordinary people. They look like people that we could find on the street or maybe in a tavern. They have leathery skin, and they're unshaven, and they have crooked teeth, ragged clothes. They are such a stark contrast with the ideal beauty of Bacchus. Now, the original name for this painting is the Feast of Bacchus, or the Triumph of Bacchus, but it's popularly known as the Drunkards. And this is because when the Prado Museum first opened in 1819, the people in Madrid came in and they saw the painting for the first time, and they were so struck with this group of people, the vulgarity of them, and how they were so clearly inebriated, and this juxtaposition with the gods right next to them. And we can see these men here that look like they're about to clink glasses, and they're looking right at us, and it looks like they're about to invite us to come have a drink with them too. And so this painting was affectionately called the Drunkards, and the name, well, it kind of stuck. And all throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century too, this was really the main interpretation of the painting. This was the main thought of the painting, that this was kind of maybe an irreverent attitude towards the myth, maybe a bit sarcastic or a bit of a parody. The Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset said that it looked like Velázquez had called together all the riffraff of society, the scoundrels and the swindlers and the vagabonds, and called them together to have a laugh at the gods. But then other art historians found this less of a parody, but they found it was more interesting to look at the fact that this is such a naturalistic representation, a realistic representation of a mythological subject. And this is kind of a nice way to blend classical culture and realism, bringing classical culture to the people. And we can think of Velázquez doing this in other paintings too, for example, his painting of Mars, which we've talked about in another video. And other art historians have focused really on the figure of Bacchus. And so we have to think about Bacchus for a moment. What is he doing? Well, first of all, he's wearing a crown of grape leaves. And what he's doing is placing another crown on a man's head. And the man clearly belongs to the group of the ordinary people, not one of the gods. But the crown is different than Bacchus's, because this isn't a crown of grape leaves. This is a crown of ivy. And a crown of ivy is a sign of distinction, of a poet. Poets were crowned with ivy because of the symbolism of a leaf that never turned brown, was representative of poets' perpetuity of their immortality through their words. So this scene isn't just a mythological subject, and it isn't just something like a tavern scene. This is actually the coronation of a poet. Now, poets had a special relationship with Bacchus because they had a special relationship with wine. Wine was considered the source of poetic inspiration. The idea of the creative impulse of a poet was thought to be something like being overcome with a fit of creativity, of being mad, something today that we might call something like a Dionysian experience. And we can think of that word, right? Dionysian experience coming from Dionysius, who is the predecessor of Bacchus. And a Dionysian experience is something that is mad and intense and sensual and lacking in reason. And this is what the creative impulse of writing poetry was supposed to be like. And wine is the source for all that. So really, we can also think too of wine kind of being the source of artistic creation, of which the highest form in the Renaissance was poetry. And in fact, we can take this a step farther, and even though we're looking at a poet here, Velázquez might have even been referring to the art of painting. We know that during the Renaissance there were these different hierarchies of different art forms, and poetry was always at the top. Now, one of the big advances of painters in the Renaissance was to ennoble painting as an art form, and they wanted to demonstrate that painting was not a craft, but that it was poetic, that it was art. So there's a lot of comparison between painting and poetry, trying to equate painting with the level of poetry. And this whole idea is called pictura poesis. So Bacchus's gift of wine to humanity really is a gift that's supposed to make man's life easier because of the hardships of living, but it comes with a challenge. It is a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it can be the source of poetic inspiration, something that can lift you up to a higher realm, give you some form of immortality, make you better, but it can also bring you down. It can also bring out the worst in you, the most animal, the most unrefined. And so here we might come back and think about these two sides of the painting again. We have these two sides of the composition, and on one hand, we have the mythological side of the divine, and the other is clearly the mundane, the ordinary. On the left, we have the classical, the idealized, people that are young and beautiful and brightly illuminated, compared with the others who are grounded in reality and dark and shadowy and gritty. And the one figure that connects the two is the poet. He's the one who's managed to dodge the challenges of the wine, to be inspired and achieve a higher dimension, reach a higher dimension. And he's being crowned for his achievements, while his companions seem completely unaware. Now, there are several paintings of Bacchus in the collection of Philip IV. And so some historians have asked the question, well, why would Bacchus be such a popular subject for Philip IV? And there are some ideas that this could also have some hints of a political allegory, because with some very creative mixing of genealogies of the Bible and of mythology and the Spanish monarchy, Bacchus was considered to be an ancestor of the Spanish kings. So if we keep that in mind, we could also be looking at an ancestor of the Spanish king bestowing gifts on his people. It's an intelligent painting, and it's filled with all of the nuance and subtlety of Velázquez, even when he's young, but everything that we'll come to know of him throughout his career. And with that, we'll conclude for today. So thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you here again next Wednesday.